This episode of the AI XR podcast is brought to you by our friends at Zappar. If you're in the XR space, you've probably felt the pain of juggling different tools, vendors, and platforms just to get an AR or VR project off the ground. It's exhausting, and it can really slow you down. That's where Zappar comes in. They've built a complete suite of tools and creative services all under one roof to make creating immersive experiences not just possible, but practical. Their next gen 3D web tool, Mattercraft, is a game changer for building immersive experiences for headsets, smartphones, and AR, VR, and WebXR. It combines the power and flexibility of the 3JS rendering engine with a rich visual editor, making it super intuitive and easy for designers and developers to use. Put simply, you get the creative freedom of a powerful 3D engine with none of the headaches. So if you're ready to take your immersive projects to the next level, head over to Zappar.com and see what they can do for you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Fink with Ted Shilowitz and Rony Abovitz for the AI XR podcast. It's Friday, March 28th, 2025. Good morning, guys.
Morning, Charlie.
Here
Morning,
we
Ted.
are again. Today, our guests are going to be Nils Pihl, CEO of Auki Labs, and Caspar Thykier, CEO of Zappar, and also our sponsor for many years now. And we're going to be talking about Auki Labs indoor navigation for robots as well as humans and the blind, and lots of good stuff in this interview coming up. So I'm looking forward to it. Meanwhile, kind of another weird news week, I think. We didn't have any kind of big financial events going on, but there were a lot of things going on, I thought, that kind of is the stirring of the pot. Specifically, I'm talking about Apple bringing Mike Rockwell out of the Apple Vision Pro and putting him in charge of Siri.
That's
How
a
is
big
Mike
deal.
Rockwell? I mean, how is he perceived at this moment, setting the promotion or the move or whatever, however we want to characterize it? But setting all that aside, how do we rate Mike's work on the Vision Pro?
Well, as you know, we recall from 2 years ago, South by Southwest, there were a lot of very interesting and intriguing engineering successes around the Vision Pro in terms of its perceived fidelity and the way they created entertainment and the hand tracking, but massive misses on ergonomics and comfort and usability. Um, I don't know much about Mike or his background. He's kind of sort of hidden in the layers of Apple, but Tim Cook
I mean,
must know
really, he
something we
was.
don't know.
I know Mike. I know
Yeah,
Mike. And
yeah.
first of all, he's a decent guy. So hi, Mike, if you're listening. Um, Given a lot of different interactions in history, I would say he was stuck between a composite of committees and arguments inside that company about what direction to take.
Yeah, I have no doubt.
The different outcomes that could have happened were quite varied. And I think what happened was the committee-based compromise. And that's what it's like when committees design things, they're like, what is this? It's like part of it's a pig, but it's got feathers and it's got wheels and it's got like, what is going on here? This was not the classic like Steve Jobs, Johnny Ives, elegant design, where if you think about Apple's process, it used to be Steve and Johnny go to the mountain, come back, and the company would just do what they said. That was literally how it was like, you know, Paul McCartney, John Lennon. Then it became there's no Paul, there's no John, or John's kind of like alienated, and it's like a team of people trying to write a Beatles song. Like Ted, you know this from Hollywood, and so Charlie from your Disney days. Imagine like 8 screenwriters rewriting a script 100 times. There's
I
no
did.
more
That was my
core
job. I
thoughts.
did that all the time.
You were that guy. Like script doctors, imagine script doctors and rewrites and edits, and it's like in production hell comes out of it. Like that's the Vision Pro. It was like it wasn't like the pure chain of thought coming from some like, Ives jobs like on high. It was something else. And I think Mike Rockwell was that guy given the task to go build this thing that a bunch of other people like were all committed on. So
Yeah.
it's like a bad DC Batman movie or something. Who knows?
Well, okay. So now let's move on to
So let's
Siri.
not blame Mike too much.
Well, but how is that history not going to repeat itself at Siri? Because
Ted?
you're saying something else. I mean, you're saying the culture inside of Apple is so screwed right now that it really doesn't matter who you put in charge because they're all going to talk themselves out of doing the right thing anyway.
I mean, Siri has another challenge and another problem, right? And this is actually a problem that we talk about, that I talk a lot about with my colleagues and cohorts right now. Ethics versus progress, privacy versus progress, use case versus progress. So on one side of the equation, and Rony, you sent some things about this just recently, you have the Sam Altman sort of version of where AI is going, which is a bit, to your point, more a little Steve Jobs-ish. We're driving down this direction, to hell with the consequences. And then you have Apple saying the consequences are the hell, right? And we need to guard against a version of hell that we are self-creating just by its nature. And I think that's the limiting factor of why Siri, the AI version of Siri, where you have to sort of ask Chat GPT to intervene in Siri if you want to get an actual AI answer. It's not elegant, and it's anything.
Well, also, it's much easier to just use the ChatGPT app.
Yes, of course.
Well, could we throw out what I think is the biggest news of our podcast? You know, we do XR, we do AI.
Yeah.
I think the biggest news is, like, you know, not being a public company, but still reporting for some media reason. OpenAI declares they're going to hit close to 12 billion in revenue this year, and Sam's projecting 125 billion by 2029. 125 billion in revenue by 2029, and he's raising 40 billion at a 300 billion pre. So just think about what that means in terms of this sector.
Well, I think it's you're sort of suggesting a valuation in the trillions.
Well, if you are a believer in the ultimate transformation of the economy, what all these investors and what OpenAI are indicating is that we're entering the 10x 5-year moment to go from 12 to 120, where people want to give him 40 billion at a 300 pre. So everyone in the space, and I'm biased because I'm in a startup in it, and we're all sort of feeling it, that the surge of that transformation is actually, you feel the wave pulling everyone. He happens to be on a big surfboard, but the transformation is much larger than 125 billion revenue. It's like trillions in revenue shift, not trillions in market cap shift. I think the thing people don't realize, like, trillions in revenue will shift to AI transformation. So people think, you know, you might have $20 trillion companies. It's kind of insane, the scale. And that's what most humans have no concept of in terms of, like, the economic change. And the folks that are in that wave, riding that surfboard, they're like sensing like one of the biggest changes in the human history happening. Like whatever we've experienced the last few years is like nothing compared to what's happening in the next 10 years.
So this is a bit like the early days, the heady days of Microsoft kind of getting ahead of what was going to happen, probably without realizing how big the compute sector would be, or Intel, you know, rising through the rise of that, now falling through the fall of that. Anything that we do on silicon has become the dominant force of every form of economics now across the planet, right?
Yes.
Even things that you wouldn't logically expect, like farming, right, are all run through compute systems, and you know, farmers with iPads running programs. And every office worker runs compute. So if every office worker and every sector is going to run AI in some form, then you're right. Now, there's also a contrarian view that says we've overstated the use of AI as a component of compute, that it won't be as big as these predictions are sort of setting the stage for. So
I think, Ted, like this will have a different shape essentially than XR. The scale is so much bigger than even the most wildly optimistic folks. I'll just put it out there that can predict. But there's some early timing that will be a little bit slower, but that slowness is still so much faster than XR or internet pickup or other things. It's like, it's not quite as fast as some of the most bullish, but some of the most bullish are underestimating the ultimate impact. I think the worst thing is that the government is not prepared at all. They're not preparing society. They're not preparing
the government
policies.
And they're not
completely.
They're not.
Let's just say it's like largely, if not completely, inept in terms of preparing like our country.
There will be no regulation. There will be low taxes. I mean, the other thing that's kind of crazy, it's all being done in the name of patriotism, but these companies are not, don't have allegiance to countries. They have allegiance to shareholders. Mm-hmm. Setting all that aside, connecting the dots between the two topics that we've hit this morning before the guest segment.
Yeah, Siri and OpenAI.
Is it time for Apple to buy OpenAI?
I think their philosophies are so diametrically opposed.
Tim Cook is so close to a John Scully moment. He needs to do something.
It's an interesting postulation. I just feel like their ethical dynamics and ethical codes are so different. But maybe in a day when a Tim Cook would, kiss the ring, which I don't think a Steve Jobs would have ever done.
Oh yeah, he would have.
You think so?
Oh yeah.
Rony, what do you think?
Charlie, here's the.
No one is strong enough to resist.
Charlie's asking a great question. Like noise signals I've heard from friends, like in the inner sanctums. So just take this as like anecdotal noise, but from people who are probably plus one away from a couple of things. Is that there's chatter that like, is Sam the successor to Satya? Is Sam the successor to Tim Cook? And I think there's a lot of shareholders like both guys are sort of, in the golden age of their careers. And at some point, who's the successor? So I think you're going to have this interesting moment.
Don't you think Tim Cook has entered the twilight of his career? You think Tim Cook is in the prime of his career? Don't you think that if as an Apple shareholder, and I know Ted is an Apple shareholder too, let me just sit back and say, okay, so you guys screwed the pooch really bad on the Vision Pro. Not as bad as Meta, because you probably only tanked 10 billion or so, but you completely whiffed. It wasn't just a little whiff. It's like I'm thinking of sending you back to the miners whiff.
Charlie, there's a cohort of people that
and they've got Siri sitting there, which is even a bigger smoking crater. And they overpromised Siri. Siri can't do the shit that they said it was going to do in 2012.
Charlie, what's the world look like if Sam runs Apple? Think about that. Apple buys OpenAI, Tim becomes exec chair, Sam becomes CEO. It's a huge shift. All the other players are probably punched in the eye so hard they don't even know how to recover. But the last bit of Apple's true soul, I think, is shifted forever, because I think Ted's right. The Sith and Jedi are like mirror images, but Apple was never really Sith. This would be a shift.
Yeah. I think in the end, shareholders will win. And so whatever makes most sense for shareholder value is what will dictate this company.
Look, if AI is the most important driver in computing, and I think almost all investors believe so, and you have like a horse that's accumulated a ton of capital, it's obvious it has to become part of one of the hyperscalers. It's just a game right now, and a bidding war. Like it's Apple or Microsoft or Amazon or Google, but Google has its own thing. The most obvious one who needs them the most is Apple. It's kind of, I mean, you called it.
I mean, it just seems like if you look at, it just seems to make sense. And I do think that Tim Cook needs to do something dramatic between Siri and the Vision Pro. It's just not a good look. I mean, he presided over the neglect of Siri while he was doing.
So is this a direct from Charlie to Tim? Hey, Tim, you should do this.
Tim, if Tim was going to listen to me, he would have lost his job long ago. All right, Caspar and Nils are here. Let's bring them in. That was a funny news segment. We should take a clue from that, because I always want to hit all the news. There wasn't.
You didn't hit stuff. We hit none of the news, but that's okay.
Yeah, but you hit the big notes.
This was better. Caspar, welcome.
How you doing?
Hey guys.
Hey Nils.
Hey, how you doing? Hey Ted and Rony.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever in the world you guys are.
Caspar, wherever you are, turn up your volume 20%.
20%? I don't know if I can
There
get that.
we go. Now we're talking.
We're cooking
closer.
That's a little better.
Excellent. It is definitely a world affair. Nils is over in Hong Kong. I'm in the UK. We're spanning the full.
Yeah, so it's like it's like 11:30, 11:20 or something in Hong Kong, and 5 o'clock in London.
Not even that. We're at 3:15.
Oh, you're a quarter past.
2 hours to go. Yeah.
You're only a 3:15. That's like a 7-hour difference. I thought it was more than that.
Wait till the end of the weekend. Our
Oh,
clocks change this weekend.
oh, okay. Then we'll be back to the normal 8 hours.
Go back to normal. Exactly right.
And so, yeah, so this is great. Everybody's got a different part of the globe covered. If only we had somebody in the Middle East, we'd be completely have all 24 hours covered. So I told the guys, that we had talked yesterday about the incredible project that you have been actually gotten involved with, that Auki Labs has been working on for quite a while, which is this computer vision indoor navigation, sort of teach a robot your interior space in a couple of hours, and then everybody can use it. It's just such a great idea.
I think it's one of those ones that everyone's been trying to do for a long time. I mean, I think what's so interesting is, in the conversations we have, say, with the RNIB, the Royal National Institute for the Blind, over here in the UK, I mean, they've obviously seen dozens of people try and solve indoor navigation, and it's kind of a gnarly problem. And they've seen people do things that are good in certain aspects of the solution, but nothing that's holistic and nothing that can be scaled. And I think that's what's so interesting about the work that Nils and the team have done. And I guess
Great. Well, I see Nils is back. He's back in the hot seat, although are you okay, Nils? It's like he's rearranging his whole recording situation here for those of you. For everybody is on audio. We're always talking about what we're seeing because we're on video. But Nils is trying to find the perfect arrangement, even though almost nobody watches the video. Why would they?
As you guys are settling in, Caspar, I believe this has been a passion point of John from Niantic as well, right? To try and sort of map the world in a different way than Google has effectively mapped the world, and get more granular and more precise and find different use cases across these sectors, right? So you're nodding. For those that are listening, you're nodding aggressively that you agree.
I am, yeah. But I think and Nils can speak to the bits that are different, but I think also specifically that focus on indoor spaces, it becomes a little bit more challenging, because you've got different things.
Massively more challenging. Yeah, it's a whole nother target that you have to try and find the right technology to hit the goals on and bring it to scale. I think certainly people can map indoor spaces, right? We know that the technology exists to do this, but the question is scale, right? And cost.
Scale and privacy, Ted. I think one thing that people forget about visual positioning systems is that the way that they work is you tell me what you're looking at, I'll tell you where you are, right? So in Niantic's system, they are quite capable of knowing what everyone is looking at, right? We need to be very careful when we arrive at the future that people like Rony imagined many years ago, where we wear AR glasses every day. That shouldn't come with John Hankey being able to know what everyone is looking at all times. And I think we have forgotten to talk about this massive privacy concern that is at the root of how augmented reality works when you have persistent AR experiences.
So how are you accomplishing that target, that goal set, differently than others?
We allow the venue to self-host the VPS. So what we decided to do is to decentralize the VPS system by allowing each venue to choose, if they want, to entirely self-host and have the data entirely on their own. Like we have none of the data, right? Niantic is collecting data from all over. If you read their Lightship SDK terms of service as carefully as I did, you'll know that they reserve the right to keep image data from any third-party app that is building on Lightship. And they expect you as a developer to notify your users that Niantic is doing this, which I think is entirely unreasonable. In fact, I confronted them about it, and they said, and this is a direct quote, "We have a great PR team, do your worst." So here I am trying, John, here I am. I think it is absolutely atrocious for these kinds of visual positioning systems to be collecting this data in a centralized way. And we need to allow for venues to entirely sit on this data on their own, not share this data with anyone. running a visual positioning system for a small space like your home or a grocery store, something like this, is doable on consumer hardware. So we are choosing to solve a different set of problems, which is how do you discover which VPS you should be connecting to, rather than building one big central VPS, spun out of, let's remember, U.S. defense projects.
Nils, let me jump in there for a second because I spent a lot of time on this. Love to get your take. We had at Magically both Google and Alibaba's investors, and they were, I think, in hindsight, really salivating over the insanely rich data we'd have about every person, eventually billions of people, knowing everything you're looking at, your emotional state, the attention, to a degree you can never get with a phone, right? They're just like, this is the greatest way to influence people en masse. I directed our team to make that largely impossible with our system and to prevent that data access. And we publicly talked about something called a live stream, which was to route all that data into the ownership of the user. And we said all that data called a live stream is the personal and private property of the user, will never be shared, and it's yours to trade or do what you want with, like your own personal data. But we made it effectively impossible unless the user decided to sell or trade their data directly. So we wanted to create like a data marketplace where it's like you could have currency or furniture and all of that. So you could imagine, though, the investment community and our big strategic investors were not happy with that. So the issue of doing this right, of protecting people from this kind of predatory behavior, is that the investment world, these large companies, don't want that to happen at all. Like now you're seeing it in AI, where it's like, now we're not only going to get your data, we're going to get your data with XR, but with AI, we're also going to absorb your know-how. So there's an assumption of mass stupidity on the part of the hyperscalers of us, of people. And you guys are on the side of, no, let's treat people better. Let's treat people with humanity. The investing world seems to not side with that completely. There are some, and I've found some of those investors, I'm sure you guys have, but I'd love to get your take on how you're experiencing it, because the quick and easy money is not to be on the side of ethical behavior, is to pretend to be ethical, to say some performative things, but micro-influence and grab and take the data and the exquisite data that'll come from XR, and then you blend that with AI, and you really have mass control over most of the globe. And you're kind of standing in the way of that.
So we raised $20 million in seed financing, and we got that from investors that care about decentralization. We raised it from Web3. We raised it from people that fundamentally are opposed to surveillance capitalism, that fundamentally are opposed to big data as a business model. And I am very grateful for this now named movement. Like back in 2021, there wasn't quite a name for this yet, but there's this movement called DPIN. I don't know if the listeners have heard.
What's it called again?
DPIN.
DPIN, Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks, which is this movement for people like Auki that are building physical infrastructure for things like helium.
This is like helium, right? It's like a tokenized, crowdsourced way to distribute technology.
So we envisioned a distributed visual positioning system where the infrastructure, like the visual positioning servers, are people's consumer hardware, people's prosumer hardware for larger commercial spaces, things like this, but not a visual positioning server that is run by Auki on data that is owned by Auki. Instead, build an open protocol that we feel is a missing piece of the internet, Rony, to allow machines to talk to each other about space.
I mean, Nils, you're going to have to create another movement, which we were hoping to be, to have happen, which is like open hardware, like phones, tablets, computers, VR and AR that believe in this philosophy. Because if you're trying to impose this philosophy on a device that now has like an AI operating system that's there to subterfuge what you're trying to do, it's not going to work anymore. So yeah, like this philosophy actually needs its own separate ecosystem, because the hardware has to behave, the sensors have to behave, the chipsets have to behave. Now, I do think there's kind of like maybe it's a third of the world, I'm not sure, movement that would actually want those devices that really are clean and safe, and no one's crawling around in you. But I think you guys have to push more than just the software. You have to create like a whole alliance, a whole kind of ecosystem supply chain of things that are not just owned by the hyperscalers anymore.
Absolutely. To that end, we recently started an organization called intercognitive.com. And the purpose of intercognitive is to make the physical world accessible to AI, which is, a lot of spatial computing and related issues. And the founding members and the people that are about to join, I spoke to one future member. I'm saying very presumptuously because I feel after our talk like they're definitely joining, that are working on secure enclave hardware, and how do you make sure, how do you know that the robots in the future that you encounter, like how do you know what software they are running? How do you know what software is on the humanoid that you're interacting with? And I think we wrote about this, of course, not as early as you did, Ronnie, but we wrote about this back in 2021, where we spoke about uh, legislation that will predictably have to come as a result of the inevitability of spatial computing. Things like uh, the ability to legislate what gets rendered in physical spaces. Like, we've already kind of soft seen this. There was this big news recently that DJI lifted the restriction that you couldn't fly drones over areas of military interest,
Hmm.
which was something that they had done voluntarily. Like, no one forced them to do this, but they had done this voluntarily. So at the OS level, the DJI drone just would not fly over areas of military interest. Interestingly, since no one made them do it, DJI took that feature away recently, which was a bit controversial. But I think things like this will make governments and big corporations wake up to the fact that they need to trust the hardware that is coming into their stores. Like at my previous startup, I was doing big data, and I learned about retailers, right? That many retailers are so sensitive about their product placement strategy that they are not allowed to store information about it on a cloud, full stop. Like, just you can't have it on a cloud. It's that level of security that they want for their product placement
Because
strategy.
they're worried about industrial espionage. Yeah.
Yes. So now imagine a world where all of a sudden Casper's glasses can have a camera in them. Or 3 years from now, Charlie's humanoid robot is going to pick up the groceries, right? These kinds of businesses and governments are going to insist on knowing that the camera isn't on, or if the camera is on, that nothing's being written to disk, things like this. So I think that there will be an enormous amount of pressure on Apple, on Google, on all of the operating system manufacturers to put these kinds of um, restrictions in place. In fact, we kind of see a little bit of that in Japan already. I don't know if you know.
Pressure from outside US.
Yes, I think pressure from a lot of governments all over the world. I don't know if this is common knowledge in America, but phones in Japan are required by law to make a quite loud sound every time you take a photo. And they put that law in place to stop people from taking upskirt photos in the subway, which they were having issues
So
with.
even when you silence your phone, it still has to make the click sound or the noise. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting that you're discussing this, because at the beginning of our podcast this morning, we were talking about Apple as sort of the semi-contrarian as it relates to the other very, very large cap tech companies wrestling and struggling with the ethics of privacy. They market privacy. They present privacy as a core pillar of their technology and their ethos. And I think everybody with even half a brain knows it's all partially true. And Apple, I think, does try harder than other companies, but grapples with it, right? So you're, as a small startup, kind of taking the same sort of ethical code base and trying to plug that in. Apple is doing this as a very large company, or at least attempting to do this as a large company.
I think Apple is one of the most trusted brands in the world when it comes to these kinds of things, and I think they deserve it. I think they deserve it. But I also think, if you guys remember when all of a sudden Apple started running these privacy campaigns, like, oh, privacy, that's iPhone, I thought that was a dead giveaway that the headset was coming. That like Apple is gonna get ahead of the conversation. So I remember saying back in 22 or whatever that like the headset is coming. Look at these privacy ads. Like you don't need to talk this much about privacy about the phone. It's not about that. They're building scaffolding for the next product that's coming out.
Interesting. Well, listen, let me. I told you this was going to happen on the podcast when we talked, that we were going to jump right into the weeds and not, reel back to tell the whole story of your company and why you're here and why Caspar is here today. So let's just start with what does Auki Labs do? And tell us about the really, really big trial you have starting in Europe.
So, Auki Labs is a decentralized machine perception company. What we are trying to build is the ability for digital devices to collaboratively reason about the physical world. And to that end, we have invented a new kind of protocol that we call the PoseMesh. So it's a PoseMesh, the first of its kind.
A
But we
mesh.
POSE mesh.
Pose mesh. Okay.
Yes. So a PoseMesh is an idea that we had back in 2021. We've kind of already touched on what it is here in the podcast, right? A fully decentralized visual positioning system without a central organizing authority, where participants can put out bounties for data that they're interested in, and other participants can get rewarded for providing that data if they have access to it. So a collaborative spatial computing protocol with a tokenized economy to allow for the exchange of data and compute resources.
Like Snow Crash. So like you could be a gargoyle.
Yeah. I mean,
but within your ethical code of who approves the scanning of that space and the release of the data of that space, right? I presume that's a big pillar of how I'm curious how you functionally do that. If you're putting bounties against, someone that happens to be in the space, an employee or a janitor that can scan something with their phone or walk around with some scanning equipment, consumer level equipment, who gives them the right to do that, and how do you manage those rights?
So we don't have today any kind of central layer that enforces that, like, oh, because you own this physical real estate, you are the one that has the right to the virtual real estate. I think something like that could become possible in the future. But today, because I live in Hong Kong, and in Hong Kong, systems like the GPS, you really start understanding how poorly suited they are for the task. I don't think it's practically enforceable with today's technology to enforce that. So what we did, Ted, is we decided that, okay, you need to enter a trusted relationship with some domain operators. We call them domains, right? A domain is someone that sets out to say, I want to describe a physical space. Like, I want to make a domain of my apartment, or I want to make a domain of your apartment, whatever, right? I set up a domain. The devices that are interested in participating in that domain, they exchange encryption keys with each other, they authenticate with each other, and they now have private peer-to-peer communications that the rest of the Auki network or the rest of the PoseMesh, like, they don't know what's happening inside of that domain cluster. And the domain owner, the person that spun up this topic, they have the special privilege to be able to post bounties for data that they want to collect to provide a canonical version of this domain, right? So anyone could be collecting any data. Today, we can't stop people from collecting data, but only the domain provider can serve data that they say is canonical. And that domain operator can also post bounties for saying, like, I am interested in new RGB data from this part of the grocery store, for example. Like, we haven't seen this part of the grocery store for the last 45 minutes. If your humanoid robot is just so happens to walk through that part of the grocery store, we're interested in buying the RGB data of you walking through. So That's the idea, and we've come pretty far because we've been building since 2021, and we were very lucky to get very generous seed funding. So now we have a rudimentary PoseMesh up and running, and we are rolling out with our first very large scale customer now. That's rolling out into over 1,000 locations this year. So it's Sweden's largest grocery chain, and what we found that we could help them do, this happened just before Caspar and I fell in love. What we found that what we could help retailers with is by digitally encoding what's happening in the physical space, we can help them with a couple of operational pain points, um, like staff training. Like where are the products actually? You know, every other retail worker is going to change jobs this year, so retailers spend a lot of money on training their staff. We provided route optimization for picking products. We find that we can reduce the average picking order by 40% in walking distance. Simple things that a lot of people, of course, have.
So
have
I can put in my grocery list and it could give me a little map.
Yeah.
And optimize to save time in shopping.
Yeah.
What we couldn't do.
So these are peer-to-peer sort of relationships of someone that's gathering the data and the company that wants to use the data, and they're building their own relationship. But how do you prevent that person to say they get disgruntled and then they just decide to release that data openly or put it on some other server, a public server that you're not in control of? I'm trying to get to the root of the. I get what you're trying to accomplish. I'm concerned that in your privatized world of that all makes sense, but in the real world, once people have that data, they may do things that are outside of your control, and then you lose the goal set of what you're trying to do in terms of protecting that data.
Well, we shouldn't have any control of the data. So what the retailers do is they self-host this entirely. So it's not that they have an account with the Auki cloud. Like no, literally, they host their solution, right? Different stores within the same chain host on different hardware. And our challenge is to make sure that a visiting application through a proper discovery service knows which hardware to connect to be told about the physical world. So they have their data, and if they decide they want to share their data, I mean, who are we to stop them, right? I'm not making normative claims on how they should use their data. I'm trying to give them the power to decide for themselves, right? If they want to share this data with the world.
Can I move us away from privacy and move on to?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. So, how does your system end up getting set up in 1,000 grocery stores? Do you go and scan 1,000 grocery stores? I mean, how does that work?
The staff themselves can scan it. So what we realized we could do to make it a lot easier to set up is create a system with, robot road signs, essentially QR codes that they place along the floor of the store that allows for the collaborative scanning to more easily stitch together the various scans, because that's otherwise very difficult to do in a retail environment just because
So,
of.
how many QR codes do you have to put on the floor for the robot to be able to see?
Well, you only have to put one, but the more you put, the easier it gets for users to also calibrate back into the space. So we just did our very largest space today or yesterday, around 80,000 square foot, just a massive, massive supermarket, the third largest in the country of Sweden. And they placed, I believe, 400, 500 QR codes, something like that, across that big space.
And so the way Zappar enters into this is Zappar has been working with Unilever on a new kind of QR code that can be read by blind people or that can be picked up by a detecting sensor or camera from, I don't know, 5 or 10 meters away. And so you found a way to integrate those new QR codes into your visual positioning system so that not only do blind people are able to read the labels but now they're even able to locate the aisle where the item is. So you're kind of combining that visual positioning with the ability when you find the object to hyper localize it and find out what's in it or if it's the right thing.
Yeah. Yesterday, in fact, I navigated to my colleague's desk blindfolded, just using a phone. So another very important contribution of Zappar's that I think they should be tremendously proud of is that they made it possible to do this inside of an app clip. Because this was a huge blocker before of doing anything that was shopper facing in the retail environment, is that the retailer wants that to happen inside of their application. And I'm going to say respectfully in a way that clearly isn't that respectful, but retailers are not the fastest app developers, right? So what we found was, hey, we want to help you with shopper-facing navigation. Let's put it inside your app. We have an SDK, whatever. It would be like, oh yeah, let's add that on the roadmap for next year or something. And that's not something you want to hear as a startup. So that's why Auki, before meeting Zappar, had to focus on helping the staff instead of helping the shopper, because it had to go inside the retailer's app. But with Zappar's huge accomplishment of making things run inside an app clip, you can just deep link from the retailer's app and load something inside an app clip that is still branded the way the retailer wants it to be. And you don't have to do this heavy integration lift, which means that now, starting this summer, we'll be able to help not just blind and visually impaired people, but everyone. We'll be able to help you, Charlie, find your basket of groceries as well. And this just would not have been possible if Zappar hadn't cracked making it run so nicely inside of an app clip. It was something we had dreamed of for years and had not been able to crack, but the wizards at Zappar had. And it also wouldn't have worked as well without these improved QR code reading abilities that they had developed for blind people. So when we found those AQRs and said like, hey, why don't we also use these for these landmarks inside the navigation? It'll make navigation so much more stable. It'll be so easy to read them that even the blind people will be able to pick them up on the floor without knowing. And we started we started building late summer, Caspar.
Yeah.
We started building together late summer, and then end of January, early February, something like that, we had our first end-to-end demo, which is something I'm gonna remember for decades, where we had a blind person come visit Zappar's office and navigate to the bathroom using the assistance of a phone. And we had just set that up, the same day, because mapping spaces like this is very, very easy. Like even this 80,000 square foot supermarket, we set up in a day or two. By comparison, the very famous grocery or retail AR navigation startup Hyper, maybe they've even been on the podcast before, founded by Andrew Hart, who was one of the original
Yeah, I
AR
know
kit
Andrew. I've written about them years ago, but they've been around for a while.
They've been around for a
They're in
while.
the UK, I think.
They have a beautiful product, really, really inspiring. But the setup process of setting up Hyper AR is you have to make sure you have a CAD file of the store, which no one does, because the store has changed since you first drew up that CAD file.
Right, the CAD file belongs to a contractor.
Yeah. So you don't have the CAD file, so that's why I say you have to make a CAD file. The CAD file has to be annotated just so. You have to send the CAD file to Hyper AR. They write on the website that they will take up to 5 days to review the CAD file before they decide if you can use the system. And then you have to go do an additional mapping step. Like setting AR navigation has been possible for a very long time. It's just been very, very cumbersome and expensive to set up, and also expensive for the customer. Like Hyper AR is $3,000 per location if you're a retailer, and Caspar and I are going to offer this for $300 to $500 for something.
So this is what I was going to ask, Caspar. What is your vision for this? Like we've kind of, as to Charlie's point, we've driven the nail pretty deep into the tech side, but what is your vision of where this goes, the accessibility, the use cases across this? Clearly you're thinking about this is the next evolution of your work.
And how do you get all those CPG companies to adapt to the new technology, adopt the new QR codes?
Well, I think there's two bits. Yeah, I mean, we're doing pretty well on the new QR code bit. I think we are now up to about 5 billion products that have AQRs on them. So yes, you talked about Unilever, but we're also working with Bayer and Diageo and Nestle and Mondelez. So it's great to see a real groundswell of other brands begin to really want to be part of that movement. But the thing that we heard loud and clear from the blind and low vision community is wonderful. This is beginning to come on products, but in a store environment, how do I get to that shelf? Help me with that ability to discover it independently. And so it was kind of wonderful sort of serendipity that we met Nils at AWE last summer, as he said. And there's just this brilliant coming together of our different technologies, because there's the PoseMesh, the domains, the application layers that Nils has already done and showed to work at scale, and then we have accessible QR codes, app clips, and Mattercraft as well, that allows us then to create this all in a way that can be done incredibly quickly and affordably. So the vision really now is, how do we bring both sides of the equation, so the CPG brands and the retailers together, to make the end-to-end experience that our end customer really wants, and that is servicing the blind and low vision community. Wonderful that it works for everyone who's sighted. I think what I love about this is that Nils has come at it from the point of, I want to give robots sight. And you go, oh, that's pretty complicated. And we've come from it as like, well, we really want to help the 300 million people who really want their independence, who are blind or low vision, be able to navigate a store. And actually, you need the same solution for both. And in the middle, once we've done that, we're good. So yeah, it works in retail, but I think it also, again, we're getting more interest there, not surprisingly, from offices and campuses, and what that might mean for museums and exhibitions. There's plenty of others, but I think we've sort of gone, let's start with the hardest problems, because if we can solve the hardest problems, everything else is kind of easy. But like I said, at the beginning, there's I think there is a degree of fatigue around this subject amongst retailers and mall owners and others, because they have been shown these sorts of solutions for a very long time, but they've only worked in part. They've either required sort of beacons, or kind of actually certain infrastructure that then can't be rolled out and scaled, or really good VPS, but actually that doesn't suffers from map rot, and what happens each time that shelves get moved, and all the rest. All these things that kind of just haven't been really taken through to the level of just keep on asking that sort of why question and the simplicity of it. And that's why I think Auki and Zappar work so well together, because we're kind of always talked about democratization and how do we get this to work on the worst devices, and what happens when you have to put it in a store that can't get any network connectivity, and how small can this package size be, and all the things that you kind of really need to think about, as opposed to look at this wonderful shiny thing that can work on the most expensive device ever in this showroom store that I've set up. So yeah, I think we're in a really exciting place, and I think there's one where there's a willing market if we can get this right. And we've set ourselves the goal of getting this right for June this year and presenting it at AWE. So we'll see how we get on.
Great. Yeah, it's kind of why at the beginning of this discussion I brought up Niantic, because granular wayfinding, really Niantic was kind of the only one to do it at scale, and now you're taking this in a whole nother direction. I mean, I think as you're talking about the big box stores in the US, the Walmarts and the Costcos and the Home Depots and the Lowe's, right? These huge spans of real estate where the best they can do is just hang up signs that say roughly what's in each aisle, and you have a massive employee base of people that you just have to go ask, where do I find this 1/16 inch screw that does blah 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 blah, right? They're like, oh yeah, that's aisle 14, level 6 down there. And that's a sort of built-in kind of human activity that probably can be replaced to a certain degree with technology, and has been attempted many times. But to your point, the technology cost and sophistication is just out of reach of most stores, right? So maybe you're going to crack the right code, and the next time we go into a Costco to find that obscure item that we want to find, that one bottle of liquor that everybody's been talking about, there it is in the corner, and you can go get it. So it's fascinating. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly the plan. That is that is what success looks like, basically.
Yeah, fascinating.
If we can connect you with that bottle of liquor, Ted, than
Game
we're
on.
Guys, it's been great having you on the show today. Caspar, always a pleasure, and your continued support is deeply, deeply appreciated by all of us. Nils, pleasure to see you. I guess you brought up AWE, Caspar. I guess it's in like 90 days all of a sudden.
It's round the corner.
Holy bro.
Yeah.
So
we'll have to see you there. We'll have to show it to you in person.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome.
There, right?
And we're going to be on stage on the show floor doing an episode of the podcast too. So probably about, I'm going to guess it's going to be about AI and XR just off the top of my head, but all right.
Little crystal ball stuff there.
Yeah, right, exactly. All right, everybody. Well, that's our show this week. We'll see you back here next Friday. Our guest will be Patty Rangel from Singularity University. And as I just said to Caspar, we'll see you all at AWE in June. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye, guys.